Hello and welcome to this webinar on how to look after your mental well-being during this time. I'm really grateful and thank you for spending your time hopefully learning some tools and tips to support yourself and others during this time. So my name is Kirsty Lilly and I've been working with Carver for just over 2 years now. And my remit really was to look at developing the products around mental health and well-being. So I've been running various courses around that subject matter. And I'm also a therapist and a coach, and I have a particular interest in mindfulness approaches and also the development of self-compassion. So I do a lot of compassionate mind training as well, which we'll talk a little bit about during the webinar. Just a few bits of housekeeping really, just to reassure you that Henry, our IT specialist, is on the webinar in the background, and if you have any issues around technical issues that you need some help with during the presentation, then please feel free to put your comments or questions in the chat box and he will answer you privately to give you a hand if you need it. Please feel free also to pop some questions into the chat box, and I'll do my very best to answer those at the end of the presentation. So there's a dedicated 15-minute Q&A at the end, and as I say, do my best to answer those. And just to reassure you that the questions will be confidential, so no one will be able to see those questions but Henry and myself. And I'll be sure not to mention anybody's name, so you can be assured to ask the questions that you feel safe enough to do so. But I won't be answering them during the presentation. So I guess this is really a webinar to give you some time to reflect on how we might look after ourselves during this very difficult time. So I'm hoping that you can sit back and relax. I guess I'm just very aware really that we're all at very different stages and we're probably all dealing with slightly different issues and we're in different contexts and we have very different challenges. So I wouldn't want to assume anyone's particular, present circumstances. So what I would suggest perhaps is that you take on board and tune into the things that you feel would be helpful and relevant for you in your particular situation, and keep open-minded and explore things that you think would be helpful, and anything that you feel may not be that helpful or it doesn't land well with you or you don't feel is that relevant, then just allow yourself to park that or leave it to one side for the moment, because there are lots of different things that people can take from this. And what I would say is, above all, just enjoy and relax, and hopefully you'll get some things to help you along the way. Okay. So I think what I wanted to start with really is just to go through some of the context of what we're all actually dealing with. I think it's true to say that we're all being impacted in a way, but those ways are very different. But this is a situation that none of us have really experienced before, which means that it can be so overwhelming. So if we think about this in terms of the context as a world citizen, there's high levels of concern globally. It's affecting every country, and we can see that there are, there's a kind of suffering on a mass scale. And for many of this, this can be quite challenging to experience something that the whole world is also experiencing too. And we can often see many news reports from different areas of the world and how they're responding to it. And I think that makes it a very complex situation. one in which there are really no easy answers, and also that it's a constantly changing situation. And we may hear news on one day that changes the next day, and that, you know, we're being told that, you know, science is leading the way, but science itself can be quite an uncertain mode. And this can be very anxiety provoking for us, because anxiety tends to arise in situations that are quite novel for us, and this one being so, and ones that have a high level of uncertainty. Because as human beings, we do like a certain level of certainty and a certain level of predictability, and also the kind of ambiguity of much of the advice that we're listening to. So anxiety at this time is absolutely understandable and a very normal response. So we click through to the context as a human being, and we're beginning to recognise that this struggle is immediate and real in our lives, and it's likely to be affecting most areas of our lives. And I think we've all been able to process now that this, in some form or the other, is going to go on for quite a long time. And even when some measures around lockdown are lifted, you know, we're going to have to be negotiating changes to our lives for quite a length of time. And as I mentioned before, we all have very different, varied and genuine concerns. And I think it's true to say that, you know, it's not something we've ever experienced, and each in our own way, we're doing our best in very challenging circumstances. And so we might be kind to ourselves and compassionate through this time, that whatever our behaviours, we are trying our best with the knowledge and in the particular circumstances we are. And that's likely also for other people around you, that they're doing their best in these circumstances to deal with something of this nature. So in terms of our organisational context, work is something that can give us many positive aspects to our life. It can give us a sense of meaning, a sense of identity. It can connect us to like-minded people. It can give us some challenges to grow. But at the moment, working life may be quite challenging for many of us, and sometimes on a daily basis. And it's likely to say that we're in a fairly challenging operating environment, which we really need to be aware of and keep mindful of so that we can navigate that. And I think this is the time for organisations to, you know, create supportive line management that checks in on the welfare of their staff, and also that we develop an organisational culture that can respond to the challenges that we have at this time. And that will be particularly important when we begin to re-engage with working life, and we'll find ourselves actually coming back into physical contact with each other. So it would be also a time that organisations might need to consider about, you know, what would their strategy be to help people feel supported as they re-engage into their working life in more of a physical way. So I think that leads us to, you know, with all being said, that this can be a very overwhelming time for many of us. It's impacting on us all in different ways. It's impacting on all areas of our lives, many of which we find very meaningful to us. And many of the things that support our well-being have reduced in certain ways. So many of us might be feeling quite anxious, fairly overwhelmed, in a low mood. Many of us, you know, maybe not used to these feelings. They may feel quite unusual for us. And we will have come into this situation with different levels of mental health and well-being. Some of us may be experiencing some positive emotions, and some of us may not really process what's happening to us in this present moment until after the threat is receded. because we'll be in a certain level of survival. And you're likely to find that your emotions ebb and flow over the days. So some days you might have fairly positive and motivated days, and other days may be more anxious, or you may experience more low mood. So they're likely to come and go like waves, and that's absolutely normal and understandable. And indeed, having a certain amount of anxiety is probably indicative that you're connecting to the events around you, and you're also showing great concern for the things and the people that mean a lot to you. So these experiences are really normal and probably an indication that you're processing things. So it doesn't help that we overly pathologize things and think of any of our responses as somehow wrong. So remind yourself it's normal to feel like that at this time. But what we can do is take steps that these feelings don't become so overwhelming for us that we can't function, or we wouldn't be able to perhaps re-engage with life when it comes back to us, which it will in time. So I don't know about you, but I think it's very understandable and very common that we feel often that we're the only one that is feeling the way that we are. Especially when we're quite anxious or in low mood. We may have a real tendency to compare our responses with other people. And this is really just what human beings do. We're very likely to look around us and think, well, perhaps other people are coping better than us. What are we doing wrong? We should be feeling this, we should be feeling that. And that's very normal and understandable, although it's not always that helpful. And it can feel that we're quite alone in our experience, especially because we're often bombarded with social media messages that might not be relevant to how you're feeling at that particular time. So it can be helpful to move from a self-focus to what we call a system focus, and really bring to mind and hold in your mind the various other people that you're close to. Maybe your life partner, your children, your friends, your wider family. And then move that focus out a little bit to focus perhaps on your work colleagues, or those people who are slightly further out in your network. Perhaps the people that you see on a regular basis, perhaps the people that you interact with in terms of your hobbies, charities that you're involved with, perhaps any professionals that you see as part of your usual day, and then widening that out a little bit to take in the acquaintances that you have in your life. So moving from a self-focus to a system focus, and spending some time during the day to really hold in mind that you are part of an interrelated system. And also that there are many people at the moment that you've never met or you don't know, who are working really hard in the background to help us all through this particular time, from medical and healthcare staff to those people looking for vaccines, to safety professionals, to people keeping electricity and gas on, people keeping our financial services going. So all of those people, we are interconnected with people in ways that we perhaps don't really consider when our life is flowing as it usually does. Now, the imagination has a massive effect on our physiology. So spending time during your day, really bringing to mind those people that you care for, and reflecting on times that you spent with them that have been pleasurable and happy for you. And the brain responds as though those experiences are happening. And that might be specially pertinent or relative if you are actually physically alone at this time, or you're shielding or social distancing in a way that you actually might be physically alone, but remembering that you can be emotionally connected by bringing back images and memories of those people that are close to you. So I think we've recognized now that we are in very changing, ambiguous and uncertain times. So these are just a few pointers really in terms of how we might negotiate. So given all that we've just talked about, there's a huge amount for us to be able to adjust to and process. So it's really important that we allow ourselves the time that's needed to adjust and process to the things that are happening for us. And it's helpful to talk to other people because that gives us other people's views on things and it helps us to be able to process our feelings. It's also helpful to write down your thoughts and feelings, so journaling can be quite helpful, or creative activities, and also listening to music that matches your mood state is also a helpful way to process the varied emotions that we're having during this time. But just allow yourself spaciousness really, and don't push yourself to adjust to things too quickly, because when the brain is quite stressed, it can, it can have a lot of difficulty in terms of taking on board new things and new ways of working. We've often heard the phrase mooted, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And I think we're beginning to realise now that the changes will be with us for some time. So it's really important that we allow ourselves to pace ourselves and to really tune in to what we're expecting of ourselves on a daily basis. So many of us have a great identity that's wrapped around work. Many of us might have a great identity that's wrapped around our family or the hobbies that we usually take part in, or charities or particular political views that we have. And we might need to loosen our grip a little bit on the usual way that we do things because things have changed. So we just need to remember to pace ourselves, and perhaps every day asking yourself, how can I let go of some of the normal expectations that I have so that I can just create an easier space? So I think another thing to reflect on is that active coping matters. And by that, I mean that when we're feeling anxious, it's really important to tune in and ask ourselves, what is it that I'm actually quite fearful of in this particular situation? So seeing if we can hone in to the root cause of our anxiety, if possible, and then asking ourselves, is there anything that I can do about this particular fear that I have? And then just using a problem solving mechanism to break the fear into manageable chunks. Reach out to the people that you feel could help you with that particular issue, and then focus in on the things that you can actually do at this time. So it might be a financial matter that you've got concerns with. It might be about learning new technology or something that you might need to ask your manager perhaps. But actually tuning in to what is driving this anxiety, and then asking yourself, is there anything that I can actually do about this? Who can I enlist to help me with this? What's the thing that matters most to me in this particular situation and this particular problem? So again, it's important that we allow ourselves to check in regularly with how we are feeling and how we are thinking. And that might give you some indications of the triggers during the days or the weeks that have a particular impact on you. And then you'll be able to navigate them in a way that perhaps isn't as harmful for you. So you may notice particular parts of the day where you feel better than others or worse than others. So tracking your emotional landscape is really helpful, because that helps us to feel a little bit more in control of how we are feeling. And then we'll be able to link how we feel with what is going on around us. The other important thing to mention is sometimes when we're feeling and thinking in a way that's quite stressful, it can lead us to take behaviours that are perhaps not helpful for us or those people around us. So being aware of how you feel and think at any one time may just create a little gap so that you know, don't always have to act on the way you think and the way you feel. And later on, I'll go through a little daily checklist that you can ask yourself either at the beginning of the day, in the middle, or in the evening. So it's really important that we keep connecting to those people who are closest to us, and also indeed important to us, perhaps our work colleagues or manager. One of the most challenging aspects of this situation is that what we're being asked to do to protect ourselves and each other is to stay physically away from each other. And actually, human beings do need relational context. We are relational beings, and we need the felt sense of each other really to keep well. So whilst these measures are vitally important to protect us all, it's also important that we keep connected as much as we feasibly can. The brain is primed to respond favourably to images of the people that you care about and voice contact. So while text messages and instant messages are a way to keep in touch, Skype or FaceTime or Zoom, where you can actually see someone's face and you can hear their voice, is much better for our physiology, because actually we're primed to respond and we have mirror neurons that respond. So as much as you feasibly can, see if you can use technology to see the person or to hear their voice, so telephone call or Zoom call if possible. It's really important to remember body basics as well. So mental health is interrelated with our physical body. So if our physical body is laboured in any way, it tends to affect our mood, and vice versa. So as much as we can with the products we're able to get in the shops at the moment, which admittedly can be a bit of a challenge, think about your diet and ensuring that you eat as nutritious a diet as you possibly can, so that you keep your energy levels up and that you can pull on that energy when you need to. Think also about hydrating yourself, and I think it's quite tempting to fall back into unhelpful coping mechanisms. So making sure that you perhaps keep an eye on your caffeine levels and alcohol levels as well. It's understandable that, you know, it's quite stressful for us, but we really need to be making sure that our body has enough fuel that we can, you know, give the mind what it needs. So using the body really to support the mind. So physical activity is really important for our mood as well. So as much as you can feasibly do so, and obviously following the guidelines on social distancing, ensuring that you move your body regularly, you either get out and take some exercise in the form of a walk or a run or a cycle, or perhaps use some of the online tools to do some exercise in your own home. Just being mindful that you tune into the wisdom of your body really, because many of us won't really be used to exercising in our home environments. But physical exercise is a really good way to kind of keep your mental health up as well. It's also, just going back to that point, important that while we might be working at home and on constant Zoom calls or Skype calls, that we kind of get up and move our body quite regularly, because when the body is kind of static for a length of time, it really sends signals to the brain that there's something in the environment to be stressed about. So you actually might, you know, think about moving your body regularly, getting up, moving around the room, allowing your emotions to process. It's quite important that we weave in activities during the day which are pleasurable for you, or which give some sense of positivity and help your system to relax a little bit. So listening to music that you find relaxing, having a warm bath, having a nice drink of hot chocolate or a cup of tea, just activities that allow your nervous system to relax. So it may be also some meditation or some breathing exercises. That's also really good for your immune system, because when the body's in high stress alert, that can kind of labor the immune system a bit. So think about on a daily, regular basis, what activities can I weave into my life that are pleasurable for me and that give me a sense of positivity. So again, many of us have hobbies and activities that really give us a sense of pleasure, and they give us an identity, and they allow us to distract ourselves from perhaps more of the challenges that we have in life. So if possible, continue in your hobbies and activities. If they're not possible at this time because of the constraints, then perhaps think about ways to keep connected with them in terms of watching videos or podcasts, or perhaps reruns of sporting championships that you found really positive, just so that you can keep that line of connection open with them. And most importantly is to share your feelings and concerns with other people that you feel safe enough to do that with. So regularly checking in with each other, so that you'll be able to share any concerns that you have and perhaps get an alternative or different point of view. Also reaching out to other people that you know that might be a bit isolated or alone at this time is a really good way for you to feel that you are contributing to things, and perhaps lending them a listening ear would be also really helpful for them, and it would be really helpful for you. So we know that those people who have a sense of meaning during difficulty feel that they're contributing in some way to other people, are much more able to make sense of things in a way that's helpful. So reaching out to each other and offering your services as a listening ear. But remembering that it's kind of a bit of a balance really between looking after yourself and also looking after other people. So certainly we talked about the fact that this is a situation where we're all feeling overwhelmed at different times. So just a few thoughts really on, how might we manage that overwhelm? And I think when we're quite anxious, there's a part of our brain that is actively scanning the environment for every problem that it can hook into. And that again is really understandable, and it's just a normal part of what the brain does. So this is a tool that I've taken from a book by Stephen Covey called The 7 Habits of Influential People. And if you're interested, you'll be able to download one of these templates. There's plenty of them on the internet. And he refers to it as the circle of influence. So what we do in any situation that's beginning to overwhelm us is that we just write in the outer circle, what are the things about this particular situation that are concerning to you, but really lie outside of your particular influence or control? Allow ourselves to acknowledge the concern that we have, but then also allow ourselves to park that for another time. And then really tune in and focus on the things that you can control or influence about this situation. So really attending to the things that you can do something about on a regular or daily basis. And you may be able to jot them down in the inner circle. The other thing to pay attention to really is the resources that you have available to you, the things that you can use, the qualities about yourself, the resources or the strengths and skills that you brought into this situation. How can you utilize them on a regular basis? Again, it's very normal and understandable that when stressed, our brain tends to drift a little bit to kind of focusing on the things that are not there or the things that are missing in our life. And we have this, what we call in psychological terms, a disappointment gap. So we look at the reality of our situation and what we expect. And if those two don't match, it can be quite stressful for us. So it's really helpful just to pay attention to when your mind is drifting to things that aren't there or that are missing, and pull it back to the things that you actually do have, the resources and the skills and strength that you actually can utilize. And again, writing these things down can be really helpful for you in a journal. So some questions to ask yourself really. What is it that I know about this particular situation or issue that I have? Sometimes many of our thoughts or elaborations or assumptions are really just that, they're assumptions, and they're based on kind of information that is missing to us at this time. So it's really helpful to pull our mind back to, what is it that I know about this situation? Instead of spending time on the things that we assume or that we don't know. And if we can find out information that's relevant and helpful, then of course, that would be helpful to do that. The other time, the other thing in periods of great change is to reflect on the things that have actually stayed the same for you. There are many things that are changing around us, but actually there are still some things that are constant for us. And that might be the love and concern of our friends and family. It might be the commitment that you have to do the job that you enjoy. It might be the commitment you have to keep supporting charities, or to keep exploring new ways of doing things, etc. So really focusing in on, in the midst of turmoil, what has actually stayed the same for you? And then asking yourself, how can I work with the things that have changed? How can I break them down into manageable chunks so they're a bit easier for me? And how can I elicit support to really deal with change in a helpful way? So again, it might be something you consider in terms of looking out for a template of this activity and seeing if you can use it in a way that's helpful. So let's have a think about, recognizing and managing unhelpful thoughts. So the first thing I'd say is, if we can't control the way thoughts arise. What we can do is to relate to them in a way that's a bit more helpful for us and doesn't overwhelm us. So if you find that your thoughts are spiraling into negativity or anxiety, that is absolutely understandable and normal, and it isn't your fault that that is happening. Sometimes our thoughts are quite random. Sometimes and often they arise out of the context that we find ourselves in, the things that are happening around us. And sometimes they are based on your previous experiences of things that we project into our current situation. So thoughts just arise. What we can do is begin to recognize them and work with them, or relate to them in a way that's perhaps a little bit more helpful for us. And recognize that our thoughts are not always true, and we certainly don't have to act on our thoughts. We can just hold them in awareness. And of course, some of this takes a little bit of practice, and it may not change the things that are happening to you, but it may give you a better ability to manage that, a little bit more effectively. So the first thing to think about really is just to tune in and recognize that your mind is busy, that it's beginning to overthink about things, that the quality of your thoughts might be getting a little bit anxious or a little bit stressed. So at regular points in the day, asking yourself, what am I thinking about? It's very understandable that we are hugely distracted. And in a recent study in Harvard University, they indicated that our mind is distracted for about 60% of the time in usual times. So it's bound to be a bit more distracted than usual. So really tuning in and recognizing that your mind is beginning to get a bit busy, a little bit, perhaps overthinking. And then the thing to do is to really ground in the body. So taking a few moments just to feel the weight of your body on the chair, taking a few moments to feel the weight of your feet on the floor and the solid of the ground beneath, and really check into the body. And one of the ways that we reduce rumination and mental activity is to get into the body a bit more and into the senses. And then just allowing yourself a few breaths in and out of the body where you can begin to settle a little bit. So perhaps breathing in through the nose, putting your hands over your tummy so that you can actually feel the rise and fall of the abdomen. So breathe in through the nose and then breathe out through the mouth, and just making that breath a little bit longer than the in breath. And perhaps doing that for 3 or 4 times, perhaps to a rate of in for 3 and out for 6, so that we can really begin to settle our minds a little bit. And when you've settled a little bit, just tuning in and asking yourself, what is it that I need right now? What would be the most helpful and supportive and discerning thing that I could do for myself next? And these are some suggestions. So one of the things we might do is use the mnemonic AHA, which stands for, is this thought of mine accurate? Is there any truth in this? How much do I believe this thought? And then the next question might be, is this thought helpful to me in any way? What information do I have missing? What is it that I'm assuming about this situation? And then we might ask, how would a friend see this? How would a colleague see this? How would somebody else in this situation see this? Is there an alternative view? And of course, you might recognize that we need a certain amount of capacity to be able to do this. So what you might do is write your thoughts down and then reflect on these questions a little bit later when you're a little bit more calm or settled. So that's a quick reframe activity. So it's A for, is it accurate? H is it helpful? What information do I have missing? And then A is there another way that I can look at this? Because when we're quite stressed, we tend to get quite rigid about the way we think about things. And looking at situations from different viewpoints is often quite helpful. The second technique really, and something that mindfulness practice, if you have a regular practice or you're interested in learning, can help us to do, is to recognize that our thoughts are not necessarily true. Our thoughts are just products of our minds and products of the mood that we're in at that one point in time. So we might just be able to push back the thought and just observe it a little bit. And what we're trying to avoid really is getting into a fight with our thoughts or trying to suppress them in any way or trying to block them out. Because we know when we do that, they tend to pop back up a little bit more strongly. So give yourself permission really just to kind of push back your thought and just observe it and think, well, is that true? Is it helpful? And then if you feel that your thoughts are perhaps too overwhelming for you to do the first 2 techniques, then it would be helpful for you to distract yourself really and perhaps engage in an activity that would take up some of that capacity. So you might go and do something, clean the cupboards out or resort something out, or go and call a friend, go out for a quick walk if you can, settle and read a book, go and listen to a podcast. So just distract yourself if you feel that your thoughts are really beginning to get overwhelming and you're not able to do the first couple. Because of course, with any new skill, these things take a little bit of practice. So again, thoughts can lead us to have or develop emotions that can be quite overwhelming for us. So in terms of what we're experiencing at the moment, some of the emotions that are very normal and understandable would be feelings of anxiety because of the constant change around us, because of the lack of clarification or information that we might have. Also, you might feel a certain sense of frustration that you're not able to do the things that you value and you enjoy as usual. So emotions are often linked to our motives, and we can often have strong motives that are aligned to achieving things and doing well at our jobs and supporting other people, caring for people, going out and doing our hobbies and activities. And of course, if these motives are blocked in any way, then feelings of frustration can arise. And feelings of anger are also very common. Because when we feel out of control, we often need to regain some control in terms of either blaming ourselves for things or perhaps blaming other people. And again, these might not be very comfortable to experience, but they're very common, very typical, and they're very understandable. So feeling bad about having certain emotions is really likely to make them feel a little bit stronger. So it's just allowing those emotions to be there as much as we can, but perhaps taking steps so they don't overwhelm us too much. The other emotions that you might be experiencing and also would be very common would be experiences of great sadness and also grief, really. And not just grief about the tangible things that we've lost, but also the intangible things of our life, that life is different than it usually is, that we've had to reorientate to not being able to do things that we normally enjoy or in a way that we find helpful. So again, anger, anxiety, and sadness also, and the grief that we feel that things have changed in a way that can often be unhelpful for us. And these are all perfectly understandable. And they are signs really that you're connecting in a way to the things that are happening around you, and they will probably ebb and flow. So how might we help ourselves in terms of them not become too overwhelming? I think the first thing to think about is to recognize regularly, what emotional state that you're in. So checking in with yourself regularly, how am I feeling at this time? What emotions are here for me? So you might ask yourself, how does anxiety play out in me? How do I recognize that I'm anxious? How do I recognize that I'm angry about things or frustrated? Where is that in the body? Where does that arise in the body? For me, if I'm quite anxious, I kind of have to keep, doing lots of little things and, really overly busy. And of course, one thing about anxiety is it kind of prompts this sense of urgency. So recognizing what mood state you're in can be really helpful. And then, so we don't personalize that too much, we might actually begin to label it. So you might say to yourself, oh, this is anxiety, here is anger, here is frustration, here is sadness. Or you might say, I'm experiencing anxiety at this moment. So really tuning in and labeling what you're feeling can be quite helpful. And that creates a bit of a gap, really, so that we can be a bit more objective. And then again, it's really important that we ground in the body. So doing the breathing activity that I've just taken you through. So breathing in through the nose to a count of 3, perhaps placing the hands over the tummy or the abdomen so that you can feel the rise and fall. And then breathing out to a count of 6 through the mouth, and perhaps repeating that 3 or 4 times so that you can really get into the body and lower the emotional tone a little bit. And then feeling the weight of the body on the chair, or if you're standing up, feeling the weight of your body on the floor and tuning into the sensations in the soles of the feet and recognizing the kind of solid of the ground beneath you. And just spending a few minutes getting a sense of the body as a whole. And then when you're ready, just looking around and labeling 4 things that you can see. So if you're looking out the window, you might see a tree, a car, cloud, sunshine, or 4 things that you can see in the room around you. And what we're doing by this is really distracting ourselves from our anxious thoughts, because they can make our emotions feel a little bit stronger. And then tuning into 3 things that you can hear. So it might be other people in the rooms next to you, the television's on, or the radio, or the bird song. So just labeling to yourself 3 things that you can hear. And then tuning in and asking yourself, what is it that I need in this moment? Do I need to share this concern? Might I need to distract myself? Might I need to go and do an activity that I find pleasant or pleasurable? And because emotions are really designed to prompt us to act, we might also say to ourselves, what is the root of this feeling that I've got? Is there anything I can do to act upon this within reason? Is there anything productive I can do? Is there anything that I can find out? Is this prompting me to take an action that is helpful? We really want to keep our emotions in a manageable way because they can be helpful for us and they can give us data which we can act upon. But when they get overwhelming, they can prompt us to do things that are actually harmful for us and also harmful for those people that are around us. And we want to minimize that as much as possible because if we're living with other people, we might be spending a lot more time with them than we normally do. And of course, relationships might become under strain because of that, because the usual boundaries have slipped a little bit. So as much as we possibly can, tuning into how you feel will give you that little bit of a gap really to recognize that what you might do next may be something that isn't that helpful for you or those people around you. But remember that emotions rise and fall. Trying to fight with them or feeling bad about feeling the way that you do is likely to make these emotions a little bit stronger for you. So you'll see on your screen a little daily prompt really. And that would be checking in at regular times in the day, perhaps in the morning, lunchtime, or in the evening. How am I feeling? What's arising for me at the moment? What am I thinking about? How is this body of mine? What does it need? Is it thirsty? Is it hungry? Does it need to move a little bit? And then asking yourself, what is it that I need to do next? What's the best thing? What's the most compassionate thing I can do for myself next? And the other way that you can use this is if you notice that your mood has shifted a little bit at a certain point in the day, then just see if you can stay almost curiously connected to that and ask yourself, what have I just been doing? What have I just been thinking about? What am I feeling now? And that might, if you write that down in a little journal or a diary, that might give you a kind of weather map to indicate the things that begin to trigger you. And then you might need to, might be able to manage them a little bit more effectively. Again, all of these things, they take a little bit of practice. So you really have to check in and do what's right for you. And if they do get overwhelming on a regular basis, then of course it would be to reach out to someone, and perhaps the CARBA support services, so that you can talk through some of these concerns with someone that can help you through them in more of a relational way. So I think I mentioned really that we're all probably living and working with people on more of a regular basis than we don't normally work with. I've got a 20-year-old son who's in the kitchen beavering away with university work, and a husband upstairs carrying on doing his quite busy work. I'm here, and so sometimes the boundaries with relationships can slip a bit because we're all with each other a lot more. And also that our home work relationships are quite different. And also because some of our relationships, because we might be actually physically alone, might have to be over an online platform, which is slightly different, or a telephone call. So in terms of protecting and nurturing our relationships, really check in and remind ourselves that these are greatly unusual times, and that relationships are bound to be affected in some way, although they can be really helpful for us. Actually, we need to just maybe tune in and protect them a little bit more. Because we know really from all the evidence that we've got that those people who fare better in really difficult times are those whose relationships are protecting them in some way, or we're nurturing in the way that's helpful. So I think a couple of things to maybe reflect on. Accepting that we're all coping very differently. Some of us might be in survival mode. Some of us may not actually want to talk about the things that are going on around us very much. Some of us may want to articulate that. Some people may look like they're absolutely fine when they're not. Some people may look quite distressed. So it's really accepting that everybody's different, everybody's got different time scales. And I think also to be generous in our interpretations of other people's behaviour. Even if you don't understand that behaviour, or you can't imagine yourself doing it, then try and be compassionate and recognise that everybody is trying their best to cope with things in the way that they know how. I think sometimes when we're all stressed, we can judge other people. And again, that's quite normal. That's what we do as human beings. But we might need to check in a little bit and think, perhaps I'll give this person the benefit of the doubt and be generous in the way that I'm viewing this. I think it's important to acknowledge with other people how you're feeling. And that's really helpful because it gives them permission to tell you how they're feeling. So perhaps either talk as a friendship group or a family or a colleagues, and check in with each other how you're feeling, so that we've all got a temperature check really about what might be helpful for us all at this time. And that might be something that we're not actually quite used to. It might feel a little bit uncomfortable to do that, but we're just actually communicating with each other where we are on that kind of emotional curve. So more so than ever really, although most of us recognise that even when we're in the working day in a building or an office, that people bring their home lives into work and they take work lives home, that we're not just one-dimensional beings. But I think more than ever, it's really tuning into the fact that your co-workers' home lives are probably more relevant than ever to you now, because you might be taking part in calls where other people have children in the background, or pets, or other responsibilities. So it's really holding that in mind. when we ask people to do things or to turn work things around, that we recognise that people have several challenges that they're trying to juggle at any one time, and it might be quite tricky for them. I think another thing is it can be tempting to kind of compare suffering. There's so much stories on the news of great suffering and loss, and we can often think, well, my feelings of suffering aren't anywhere near that, but actually all of our feelings are valid. So try not to compare what you're feeling with what anybody else is feeling, and try not to compare what you're experiencing with what anybody else is experiencing, or to make judgments around that, because it's not helpful for you and it's not helpful for other people, because we all have different resources. Some of us are able to cope, some of us are able to cope less than others because the things that have happened to us in the past, or the particular situation that we find ourselves in the present moment. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, then please reach out for help to either friends or family, or to the support lines that are readily available for you. And I think another thing to mention here is that I do a lot of work in the NHS. And although most of the resources are actually, supporting people with coronavirus, if you are concerned about your physical health in a way that isn't to do with coronavirus, then please access the medical services that are there for you, because they are open for other things. And again, if you have children whose health is deteriorated in any way, please don't feel that because it may not be coronavirus related, that in some way that you're being that you're taking people's time off, because the NHS is there for people at this time. I think the other thing that can be helpful is to really tune into boundaries, which create a sense of space and trust for us. So remember to communicate with people what your boundaries are, so that people understand what you like, what you don't like, what you find helpful, what you might find really unhelpful. I think that's especially relevant with Zoom meetings, which many of us are not used to. Interacting on them might be quite challenging for some people, maybe of a more introverted nature. So we might just check in really and allow each other to communicate what we feel is helpful and what we don't like. And if you do reach out to someone to ask how they are, remember that, it's okay if people don't want to take you up on that offer, because it may not be the right time for them to do so. So in terms of, making sure that our communications are meaningful, perhaps really tuning into creating a space that's non-judgmental. And remembering that as human beings, it's very understandable, and it's actually human that we do appraise things and we do judge them. And that's just part of the way the mind works. It's always judging what's safe, what's not. But in terms of communicating with people, it's often unhelpful. So while we may not be able to stop that tendency, we can definitely become aware of it. And we become aware of when we're moving into judgment, and then give yourself a chance to move out. So just creating a space with someone else that is as non-judgmental as you can make it. I think another thing at this time that's helpful is sharing our vulnerability, especially if you're a manager or a leader in any way, that you actually communicate to other people how you're feeling at this time, and maybe some of the challenges that you've got, or some of the difficulties that you're experiencing. And that really allows other people to be open and honest. So one of the questions, how are you, is a great question. How are things for you? But another question that might be really helpful is just really, say to people, what are you finding most difficult about this situation? What are the things that you're finding most challenging? And that really allows them to speak about those things, especially if you've shared a little bit of what you're experiencing too, of course, in a way that you feel safe with. And then I think the other thing to think about really is to, I mean, I think we could all do better at listening. And it's really tuning into listening with the whole body, not just with the head, because a lot of times when we're listening, we're actually listening for a gap in which we can answer, or we might be listening so that we can give advice, or we might be listening to make a comment. And so in some ways, we're not actually fully present because our brain is working overtime and, what am I going to say next? And what advice am I going to give? And I don't agree with that comment. I don't understand that. And actually, we're missing vital clues. So we really might just sink into the body and just really pay attention to listening with our whole selves, giving the person space to talk, and then an appropriate moment, then perhaps, speaking back in a way that's helpful. And the other thing that's really helpful in terms of conversation is to remember to reflect what you've heard so that the person really feels that you have actually tuned in and listened because you've got that accurate in some way. So you might start that with saying, what I think I've heard is, what you were telling me is, and that communicates your attempt at really trying to understand this person and where they are. It also helps that person to hear their own words, which might help them to make sense of what they've just said. That's the basis of many counselling, really, is reflective listening. And it also prompts them to think about things that they've missed in that narrative, and so that they might fill a few more gaps in for you. So summarising what they've said and reflecting it back to them can be really helpful, and it makes them feel really heard. Of course, some of this takes a little bit of practice, and it's okay to say to people that you didn't quite understand what they said, or can you tell me a little bit more about that, or what did you mean when you said this? So clarification, and it's okay to really admit to people that you're not experienced in exactly what they're going through, but you are willing to sit and listen and work with them to come up with perhaps a way forward that's helpful and collaborative in some way. Okay, so we mentioned before that our anxious brain really is prompting us to speed up a little bit. I mean, that's what anxiety does, really. It's kind of scanning the environment, looking for things that are problematic, coming up with the worst case scenario. That's really just what the anxious mind does. And in some ways, that's kind of helped us to survive as a human race. But what we want really in times of anxiety, especially when the things that are making us anxious, there's kind of quite reduced ability to do something about them because much of this is out of our hands. So we want times in the day where we intentionally and actively slow down. And that might be in the form of rituals. So rituals are things that help us to feel safe and grounded. And that might be something as simple as the way that you make your breakfast in the morning, or your lunch, or perhaps even your gin and tonic at the end of the day. So seeing if you can tune into that activity and really slow down and experience that through the senses, and making that a little ritual of the day. So you just have periods where you're really slowing down and paying attention and really experiencing it through the senses is quite helpful. And you can involve other people in those rituals, perhaps your children or your partner. So there's quite a lot of uncertainty around us at the moment, which we've talked about. And one of the ways that we can help ourselves with that is to have some kind of routine for the day, so that we can have a certain sense of predictability, and that helps us to feel quite safe. So if you haven't done so already, then thinking how you can create a routine that works for you, so that your brain is not always thinking, oh gosh, what's going to happen next, that it kind of knows what's coming next. Try not to make it overly rigid, of course, because that just becomes another pressure then, if we have to do things at this time and we have to do things at that. But especially if you've got young children, free time and free playtime is really good for them, creativity, being spontaneous. But actually, most children thrive, and young people thrive, on some sense of routine, some sense of boundary. And as adults as well, it can be helpful for us. So gratitude practice can be really helpful as well at this time. There are many challenges for us, and this is in no way to diminish the difficulties that we're all experiencing. And it's not a way to beat yourself over the head that you should be grateful for this or you should be grateful for that, the tyranny of the shoulds, as they call it. But what gratitude practices are is just acknowledging the things that are difficult, but inclining the mind to pay attention to the things that you are grateful for, or perhaps a couple of things in the day that have gone well for you, or that you're happy about, or that you've achieved. So the brain has a negativity bias, and Rick Hanson is a neuropsychologist that coined the phrase that the brain is like Teflon for the positive, and it's like Velcro for negative experiences. So negative experiences and emotions can happen quite quickly, and they can linger in the brain for quite a length of time. And in terms of evolution, that's been really helpful, because that's allowed us to survive as a human race, that we have a really quick ability to recognize threat and to mobilize the body to do something about it. But of course, in terms of our mood, it's not quite so helpful that we have this really quick ability to recognize the things that are difficult for us. So again, it's not to diminish and to be unrealistically positive, but it is every day to gently incline the mind to the things that you are grateful for of the day, and the things that have gone well for you, and also the things that you've achieved. So setting yourself a couple of goals during the day, small, manageable, realistic, achievable goals that you can do on a regular basis, that at the end of the day you can reflect on and think, well, I've done this today, and that's been quite helpful for me. So gratitude practice can either be something that you do at the beginning of the day, in the middle of the day, or at the end of the day as a reflection, and just allowing that gratitude to sink into the body. It takes on average about 20 seconds for a positive experience or emotion to land in the body. So allowing yourself some time to savor the things that have gone well. It's not necessarily going to change the thing that's happening to you outside, but what it will do is maybe give you an ability to deal with that, or to bear that a little bit easier for you. And also reflecting on the many acts of kindness that we're seeing, and the many people who are working above and beyond in all sectors to keep the country and the moving forward in a way that's helpful. So you might incline your mind to people that you don't even know, or organisations that you're not familiar with, really, as a way of moving to the kind of system focus we talked about. So a couple of things really. Limiting your news and social media if you find those overwhelming for you, perhaps tuning in once a day and making sure that they're trustworthy, the sources that you are tuning into. Keep a sense of perspective and don't allow yourself to look too far ahead. Perhaps take the day as it comes or the next couple of days. But do allow yourself to imagine the things that you will do when the restrictions are lifted in some way. Perhaps creating a vision board or talking with friends and family about the things that you will do when you can get back together. And remembering, as with all situations in life, that things do change. They may not get better straight away, but they do change and morph into something different. And although uncertainty is challenging, even that will change in time. So I'd really recommend that you perhaps tune into the mindfulness resources that are available through Kava as well. Short mindfulness practices can help us to steady our attention because our mind is constantly being dragged away to the negative aspects, to the things that you find stressful, because that's really just what the mind does. And regular short practices can help us to refocus on the things that are helpful for us, paying attention into the present moment, instead allowing of our thoughts to be hijacked. So really short practices, learning how to be mindful can be a really helpful way to help yourself. And something I'm particularly interested in terms of, there's lots of research at the moment looking at compassion-based practices and how we can be more compassionate to ourselves and the many benefits that brings. So really, compassion is just about acknowledging the things that you're finding difficult and making a commitment to yourself to try and prevent them or alleviate your feelings in some way. So every day you might say to yourself, what is the best thing I can do for myself today? How can I be my own compassionate coach? How can I support myself through this time? So I'm not only there for myself, but I'm actually there for other people, and that I'm able to function when this time lifts. So a couple of slides really to end before we have questions. These are some daily reflections that you could maybe put on a post-it note and put near your desk. So asking yourself what you're grateful for, who you're connecting with today, what expectations of normal might I let go of, how might I get outside, move my body, and as I've just said, what actions can I take for myself that are kind? It's interesting actually, in some of the research that's coming out, with the thing that people are finding most difficult is obviously the isolation, but also that people are being really hard on themselves at the moment and expecting a lot of themselves. As a way of ending the day and marking between maybe your work day and home, or maybe the things that you've done, so you can then move into restful phase, evening reflections. What's been happening? What have I noticed? How have I felt? Maybe what have I learned today about myself? And what might I do differently tomorrow? So this is a wellbeing plan, and I've created, I think it's about a 6 or 7 page document, and you'll all be sent a copy of this after the presentation in a couple of days. And you may be able to work through it really and just create your own wellbeing plan or share it with family and friends as you see fit. So the questions are very briefly, what do you arrive here with in this situation? What skills, what strengths that may have arisen out of previous difficulties that you've had? We've all been through things that are difficult. We've all achieved things that we probably didn't think we could. So out of those past experiences, what is it that you can bring into this one? What skills did you learn? What strategies? The second chapter is knowing what you need. So what is it that you need when you're anxious? What is it you need when you're angry and frustrated? What is it you need when, to be more positive? What is it you need to experience more pleasant emotions? So just jotting those down. Who's in my team? So the contact numbers and details of people who cheer me up, people who are really good listeners, people who have a really interesting, curious way to look at things, people who are more pragmatic. Can you just list who is in this little team or tribe of yours? And when you've got the details at hand, you might be able to call them or contact them when you need. So learning about self-compassion is really reflecting on the habits that you have, either the thinking habits or real habits that are not that helpful for you, and just jotting them down so that you can be aware of them and notice them as they arise. Finding your stability is really about jotting down the activities that help you to ground yourself and the things that are going to help you to get through this time. Maybe webinars to watch, numbers of support services, maybe new skills. If you feel that you've got the capacity, is it a time that you can learn something new? If you don't feel that you've got that capacity, that's fine. And the last bit of it really is, and maybe to reflect on, come back to at a later date, would be, without diminishing this in any way, what is it that we might learn out of this situation about ourselves and the world around us that might be helpful for us in the long run? Is there anything positive that is arising out of this situation that you might actually take forward into your life? So you might keep that one open and just jot down various things that you've noticed about yourself or other people that actually you think, well, that's something I've not noticed before, that's something I've learned. How can I move that forward a little bit? So, as I say, not to diminish the difficulty, but giving some energy to the very best version of this that you can. And you'll all get a copy of that wellbeing plan. So, okay, so this is the time now where we've got some time now, about 15 minutes really, for questions if you have any, or any points of clarification. So if I just give you a little minute to perhaps jot some questions in the chat box, and Henry will collate them, and then I'll do my best to answer them as we go. So if anybody's got any questions, just popping them in the chat box. Okay, so I've just got a few questions here, and so we've got one of them on, it's a work-based question really, and it's about supporting other people and how you might recognize that they're distressed in any way, especially because we're mostly communicating over Zoom or online platforms. So I guess that just 3 points really. Obviously tuning into any changes or differences you see in people's usual behavioural style. So if people are quieter than normal, if they're disengaging than they normally do, if you're having difficulty getting in touch with them, if you notice on Skype calls that you know, that they're looking a bit agitated or anxious. But really, it's about changes in behaviour and tuning into them, and then reflecting back in a quiet time. The second point really would be to create a culture openly within the team that you actually acknowledge the difficulties that we're facing, and really encourage people to contact you if they've got any concerns that you can help them with, either on a workplace basis or other things that they're dealing with, maybe children that they're dealing with in their working environment, or financial pressures that they've got. So, you know, it's about looking for signs, but it's also about creating a culture where you actively encourage people to contact you or to speak out if they have anything that they're finding difficult. And I think the third thing would be to really tune in to your staff members or to the people around you, because this doesn't necessarily have to be about work, and just asking yourself, what particular risk factors has this person got in their environment which may mean that they're more vulnerable to feeling distressed? So if you know that people have got elderly relatives that they're concerned about, or that they're in some way financial concerns, or they've got children at home that they're dealing with, or they've got underlying health conditions. So as well as tuning into signs within the person, what risk factors are around them? And if you recognise that there's quite a few, then it's making an extra effort to keep in touch, really, and to just check out that they're okay. And another question here. So this person is dealing with teenagers in the house and just wants a few pointers really on how do you deal with teenagers? Well, that's kind of the $1,000,000 question. So I've got, I've got about four little points really with teenagers. The first thing would be to expect crashes of mood. And many teenagers are being denied the opportunity to do exams, to take part in the rituals of leaving school, having proms, starting new jobs, going traveling. So many of them have been working really hard on different things, and they're coming to this point now where there's kind of, it's all a bit left open. So I would expect emotional crashes and outbursts, which is very typical for teenagers anyway. But there's a lot of pressure on them really, and their usual modes of being able to deal with those emotions are probably reduced. The second would be to respect their need for privacy and to have contact with their friends. So developmentally, teenagers or young people really need their friendship groups. So really respecting the privacy of their own room, and also their constant need to be on the phone as friends, and try not to take that too personally, and also not to be forcing them to do you know, activities as a family if that's not what you normally do. The third one would be to acknowledge with them how difficult this is. I think when we see other people that we care about in pain, we can quickly rush to say, oh, don't worry, it'll be over soon, it's fine, don't worry, you know, it'll come on, because we find it difficult to witness other people that we care about. But this is the time to acknowledge with the teenagers just how you recognise that it's really stressful for them, it's difficult, it's very disappointing, it's frustrating. And I think by that they feel quite heard. And then, you know, patience, really. I think really being patient, keeping lines of communication open, especially if the relationship was a bit challenged before this. I think it's incumbent on us as parents and adults to remain as calm as we can and as patient with, as we can. So I've got a question here. Do you have any top tips of helping children who are young and don't fully understand the situation? Yeah, so I think the most important thing really is children are like sponges, and they are really taking in messages from the wider environment in ways that we don't fully comprehend. So it's really important that you allow them their own narrative. So in an age appropriate language, ask them what they think is happening, ask them their views, because you'll be quite surprised on what comes back to you. And then you may be able to have a conversation that's age appropriate. Because if we just don't give them that opportunity, they may be harboring all kinds of thoughts and feelings about this that you're not aware of. So tune in and ask them what they think is happening. And then you can have a kind of conversation and reset some of their fears that are not there. I was talking to a little boy the other day in clinic who said that he thought coronavirus was because he'd heard the word bug, he thought it was a spider. And we were able to have a really good conversation about the fact that it's not a spider, because what we don't want is every time the little boy sees a spider, it's difficult for him. So really helping them to have a story. Art is a really good way to help them express themselves. So get them to draw a picture of what they think is happening, or a picture of things. The other thing really is to make sure they have a routine, and make sure that there's times of the day that's predictable for them, and also give them a choice on activities that you do, so they feel some sense of control and some sense of agency. And also really important to manage yourself as a parent, because they are really clued into how you are responding to this. So being really mindful that as much as possible around them, you remain grounded and calm. You don't have to be perfect in front of them, but if you do get a little bit upset, just talk with them about that and say, I was just a little bit upset today, but it's okay. I've got through that and we'll get through this together. So I think being as honest as age allows really will help children to get through this, and also help them to keep in contact with their friends if that's possible on a Zoom call. I'm just reading this question that's come through. Yeah, I really relate to this last question about how do we encourage others to keep their social distance when out walking in shops. So some people are very careful, others don't seem to care. It may be some people don't care. It may be that they are in denial. There's a whole lot of reasons, really. I guess what we can do is model good behaviour. And if you feel safe enough, you may remind people about social distancing. But of course, maintain your own safety during this, because people's stress levels are quite high. And if you kind of interact or intervene to tell people things, they may not take it that kindly. But if you do feel safe enough and able to do so, then remind people, because it may be just that they're quite stressed and they've forgotten, or they're not sure what to do. There's a whole lot of reasons why that might be. So another question coming in here. It can be very difficult to really embed some of the messages to elderly parents in terms of them needing to maintain social distancing or allaying their fears. I think all we can do really is keep the lines of communication open, answer any questions, provide people with the information that they need to make relevant choices in their lives. But this situation is going to be overwhelming for many people in different contexts and situations. So I think it's giving people the information that's relevant to them, giving that information in ways that are small, bite-sized chunks that don't overwhelm them, giving information that's helpful to them. And that's all we can do, really, and giving the information in a way that we are calm and as centered, as grounded as we can be. So just waiting in case there are any more last few questions. There is just another one that's come through here. Someone here saying, is it they're feeling quite guilty about feeling quite positive and actually feeling a lot less stressed than they do. I think I've tried to mention all the way through, really, that whatever you're feeling is okay for you, although some of those feelings might be quite difficult and unusual for you. One of the things that is coming through is that for some people, the things that generally stress them out quite a bit, like the daily commute into work, navigating traffic, navigating parking, the trying to find a desk in an office, mixing with a lot of people, actually those things have receded slightly. So that's taken stress away from them. And also the things that they generally miss in the day, like seeing their family a bit more or spending time with their children, being able to explore things that they don't normally do. They're actually being able to connect to that a little bit more than they normally do. So of course, arising out of all this, it may be that some people are feeling actually in some ways less stressed because the drivers of stress that they usually deal with aren't there anymore. So I think it's whatever you're feeling is absolutely fine. And if you are having moments of great joy with family and friends that are usually a little bit shorter, then enjoy that, I think. Okay, so thanks for all the questions that's come through. Really grateful that everybody gave their time up, and I very much hope that you've taken some things away. So I hope that the next couple of weeks and months for you will be as good as they can be, and that you find ways to support yourself through this difficult and challenging time. And please reach out for any help that you need through CARBA or other help services that are out there, and take care of yourself.